mystery writers. Welcome to Write a Killer Mystery, where we learn to make a good mystery great. And today I'm going to talk about something really useful and important for mystery writers, and that is the 4-act story structure. First, I want to thank my patrons on Patreon for their continued support of this video series. And if you would like to join us, there's a link in the description below. All right, the 4-act story structure. It perfects your mystery. You can use the 4-act structure to create a puzzle for your reader and introduce your sleuth, discover clues, suspects, and the victim's world, narrow down the possibilities, and finally expose the true villain. When you start a new novel, you want a plot that delivers mystery genre tropes, and you can use the 4-act plot structure as your guide. And you'll know the focus of each section of your novel and how to lead your reader to that revealing climax. When you know the structure, it's easy to keep the main events in your head as you write, and each event is a destination. And at each destination, the story changes just a little bit. So change builds tension. Tensions keeps readers turning pages, and that's why it's so useful to you as a mystery writer. You have your detective, the murderer, the villain, and now it's time to think story. So the framework of the 4-act structure gives you the freedom to write without a commitment to each scene, while keeping in mind the important steps of your story. As I said before, you want to go from one plot point to the next plot point. Some writers find it helpful to sketch out the major story plot points, the inciting incident, the first plot point, the pinch points, the midpoint, that second pinch point, and of course the climax. And after the writers note these major story points, all the chapters in between flow toward the next story point. And as you write, you have a goal in mind, and that's to get to the next story point. So it, in one way, focuses your writing on the here and now of the story. In other words, you're not writing to the end until you get to the end. You're writing from one story point to the next story point. You can write down these plot points, or you can keep them in your head. It depends on your style. The way you use the structure is really, truly up to you. I want to go through how this structure helps structure your mystery, all right? So let's look at Act 1, and that's the setup and complicate stage of your story. The beginning is about bringing your reader into the story, and in a mystery, you introduce them to your sleuth, and usually the murder happens somewhere right at the beginning. And one of the best ways to introduce your sleuth is to show them solving a problem. Tell your readers your sleuth can do what she'll need later on in the story to solve the big murder and to find that killer. So you want to illustrate at least one of your sleuth strengths that you've created in your character background. And if you know how he'll catch the vision, mirror that talent in the beginning. Give your reader a hint of where they're going. You introduce your reader to the sleuth and their everyday world by showing how your sleuth acts when faced with a problem. And you're going to be throwing a lot of problems her way. So highlight those skills at the beginning so your reader has confidence in your sleuth. And once your reader knows your sleuth and sees them in action, something happens that triggers the main story, and that's called the inciting incident. And once your reader has a taste of your sleuth, bring them into the main story problem and move your sleuth out of their everyday world into this new challenge. And in this scene, present your sleuth with a challenge that he didn't see coming. Something happens that pulls your sleuth toward that main mystery. It could be a new neighbor, an old lover, a vehicle breakdown, or anything you want to imagine. And although your sleuth and your reader doesn't know it yet, this small disturbance in their regular life is heading toward that big mystery. And once you introduce this event, show your sleuth's reactions. Get your reader more involved with your sleuth. And it's time to meet the mystery head on. And this is the first plot point. Now you're going to introduce the dramatic event that you must answer in the climax of your story. This is the beginning of the mystery, as it were. In a mystery, the sleuth is assigned or volunteers to find the killer. That's going to depend on your story. How this event unfolds will depend on the type of mystery you write. So a cozy heroine may take on the search, or a cop may be up next on the rota. It just depends on your story. But either way, your sleuth protagonist enters the mystery and takes on the challenge of solving the puzzle. And then we get to Act 2. They've taken on the challenge, and now here we are, okay? This Act 2 is conflict and rising action in discovery. The second act is all about discovery. It's the expansion phase. And now your sleuth must poke and probe to learn about the victim and the murder. He examines physical evidence and discovers a list of possible suspects. And in this section of your mystery, your sleuth gets to know the victim's world, what the victim did, who else was in that victim's world, and why the victim was where they were when they were murdered. It's just like discovery and discovery and discovery. And your detective expands the vision of the victim, getting to know their world and the people in it. This is also the place where you introduce any subplots. The sidekick has a problem, your sleuth meets a love interest, outside forces put pressure on your sleuth with more juicy complications. But you want to start your subplots here at the beginning of the second act. Okay, and then there's a pinch point. There's something that things don't go smoothly. A piece of evidence is lost, or your sleuth misinterprets, at least for now, the significance of a clue or what a suspect says. And as your sleuth meets the suspects, those suspects have their own personal reasons for resisting or not fully cooperating. So you want to challenge your sleuth at the pinch point. Whatever your sleuth thinks is the right approach doesn't work, all right? Your sleuth is nowhere near discovering who the killer is. And during this discovery phase, you want to throw in as many complications as you can and make each complication more challenging than the last, because all along as you're building your story, you're raising the stakes. You're making things just a little more difficult for your sleuth because it's going to be really hard toward the end. And more complications mean more tension, and more tension keeps readers guessing and turning pages. So finally you get to the midpoint of your story. The midpoint comes between Act 2 and Act 3. And this is where your story pivots. Your sleuth may discover that she's been going down the wrong path and has to rethink everything, or he may be so discouraged that he thinks about giving up. In other words, a midpoint is just a hard place. It's like, oh, we've got to rethink everything. And now we're heading into Act 3, and this is crisis after crisis. And Act 3 is the contraction phase, just as Act 2 was the expansion phase, discovering more and more. Now your sleuth is going to take that information that they've gathered, all the clues and the evidence, and all the conversations they've had with the suspects, and look at them in a completely new way. Your sleuth is looking for an alternative approach to solving the puzzle, and it doesn't go well. That is the main point of Act 3, is whatever your sleuth tries to do, it doesn't go well. They have to re-examine everything they thought they learned in Act 2, and at the same time as you expanded those possibilities in Act 2, now you're narrowing down the possibilities in Act 3. And at the same time, you're adding complications and twists to the subplots. Don't forget those subplots, all right? And then just about in the middle of Act 3, you're going to have another pinch point. This is a place where, ooh, it's just not working at all right? It shows your sleuth that the new direction they chose after the midpoint isn't going to get the results they want. The undiscovered villain may set a trap that confuses your sleuth, and your sleuth is going to feel like they're in over their head. Everything is just not making sense at all. It's not coming together. This is the pinch point of Act 3. Your sleuth must gather forces. She may find additional support or discover fresh evidence and somehow get closer to discovering the murderer. And your sleuth examines all the old evidence with new information and takes a fresh approach. And he's looking for the evidence or suspect statement he overlooked before. And now on that new discovery path that they're taking at the pinch point, your sleuth feels she's closer to the killer. And then there's the next plot point. The killer antagonist uses a smoke screen, and everything this sleuth thought they knew leads nowhere. And your sleuth needs to clear his vision of the victim's world. They have to just take a totally new view of the victim's world and start with a new approach. And this takes them on the way to Act 4, the climax and wrap up. And now in Act 4, your detective is captured or blocked from finding the killer. It's not working at all. And the victim's world, even though they thought they knew a lot about it, becomes more of a mystery. And your sleuth is just not seeing the right way. And if she's trapped or captured, there's no way out. And now we get to the rising conflict, because your sleuth is your protagonist. So they see a way out. And after the escape from that trap or that block, your sleuth rethinks and gets a glimpse of who the killer might be. But there's still something that isn't clear. There's still something that's not connecting. Your sleuth gets ready to confront the killer, but there's one last defeat, and that's the biggest of all. Your detective knows the killer is dodging, but can't get to that last confrontation. And for the moment, your killer survives any accusation. But our hero's our hero, right? Your detective finally finds the killer, and there's one last surprise that killer has for the detective. Your detective may have made a false assumption or misread the killer's intent, and the killer pulls out one last trump card, and it's one the detective didn't suspect. It just comes from out of left field. Um, and whether it's a battle of wits or hand-to-hand fighting, the killer plays that one last card. It's one last card, the killer's last-ditch effort to get rid of your detective. But your detective finally realizes how to confront the villain and challenges him face to face. And at this point, your sleuth reveals the murderer, and in addition, your sleuth shines the spotlight on their special skills, whatever it may be. And those skills are what led them to find this final confrontation and the revelation. And during all this rising action, bring each subplot to a conclusion, because the way that mystery readers respond in the genre is once your sleuth reveals the killer, you finished your unwritten agreement with the reader to solve the puzzle. And as far as your reader is concerned, once that killer is revealed, the story's over. They were here for a mystery. They got this plot. The killer's revealed. That's it. So you want to tidy up everything really quickly after that revelation. Just remember, in Act 4, while all this is going on, you pull out all the stops. And the confrontations and reversals are the most challenging in your story. And the villain has the upper hand until that final revelation and wrap up. And once your sleuth has revealed the villain, you wrap up your mystery. Bring your story to a quick conclusion. Okay, that was a lot to say in a very short period of time, but I hope that gives you an idea of how that 4-act path to puzzling your reader really helps you work out your mystery so you don't get stuck in, especially in the middle, and how it leads your reader through all the stages of the mystery, because your writing has a plan to follow that allows you the freedom to write scenes that would work within the framework. You just have to get from this plot point to this plot point to this plot point, but how you do it is up to you. That's your creative vision. And you lead the reader to the next plot point until they arrive at the end. So keep the structure in mind as you progress from one plot point to another. I think this will really help you keep going. It'll not get stuck. You know you're going from the inciting incident to the first plot point, etc., etc. And you have, I use these plot points as like mini goals. You're getting from this plot point to the next one. It's as far as you have to get, all right? You know, the end is way at the end. And your job, as you're currently writing, is to get from one plot point to the next plot point. Okay, I hope that helps. And thank you for being here. Once again, I want to thank Audible for sponsoring Write a Killer Mystery. And if you enjoy mysteries as much as I do, it's really fun to listen to them with absolutely brilliant narrators on Audible. And if you haven't experienced listening as a way to engage with stories, There's a link below that will give you a 30-day free introduction. So check it out. All right. Keep writing, keep your mysteries mysterious, and I will see you next time.